One explanation used by very few critics today is called the Swoon Theory, which suggests Jesus did not really die on the cross, but simply fainted due to exhaustion and blood loss. After being placed in the grave, those who hold to this theory explain Jesus was revived by either coolness of the tomb or spice-laden burial clothes he was tightly wrapped in. As James Hastings explains, myrrh was a drug which adhered so closely to the body that the grave clothes would not be easily removed. In any case, Jesus somehow wriggled out of grave clothes weighed down by 100 pounds of dried and hardened spices, which tightly pinned his arms against his body. He then took time to reform the grave clothes into the shape of his body, and also neatly folded the additional cloth on his face. Next, he supposedly rolled the 2-ton stone up a slotted incline. According to scholars such as T.J. Thornburn, the stone in front of the tomb was used as a protection against both men and beasts. Concerning the size of the stones used at that time, he said, it usually required several men to remove it. Certainly, a mostly dead Jesus could not have removed the stone and pushed it up the slotted incline in front of the tomb, especially without the guards hearing the grating stone. According to the theory, Christ then apparently either quietly escaped or fought through the soldiers and marched on his merry way to Tibet, Japan, or Egypt, where he allegedly fell in love with the priestess Isis. There exists no historical evidence whatsoever for such outrageous claims. The Swoon Theory fails for several additional reasons, including the fact that it is ridiculous to believe Jesus survived a severe pre-crucifixion beating and scourging, 6 long hours nailed to the cross, and a spear wound through his heart, followed by 3 days without food or water, before allegedly escaping from the tomb. As E.H. Day said, a long walk, followed by the appearance of the disciples at Jerusalem, is inconceivable in the case of one recovered from a swoon caused by wounds and exhaustion. As Jesus had only swooned, then according to Luke 24:13, he must have walked to a village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. To think he could have done this in such a weakened condition on feet whose bones, nerves, and tendons had been crushed during the crucifixion is incredulous. Surprisingly, it was resurrection skeptic David Strauss who delivered what is considered to be the knockout punch to the theory in the 1800s when he declared, it is impossible that a being who had stolen half-dead out of the sepulchre, who crept about weak and ill, who required bandaging, strengthening, and indulgence, and who still at last yielded to his sufferings, could have given to the disciples the impression that he was a conqueror over death and the grave, the Prince of Life, an impression which lay at the bottom of their future ministry. Such a resuscitation could only have weakened the impression which he had made upon them in life and in death, at the most could have only given it an elegiac voice, but could by no possibility have changed their sorrow into enthusiasm, have elevated their reverence into worship. The Swoon Theory has now been abandoned by all who know the historical and medical facts dealing with crucifixion. While scholars have discounted this theory for at least 200 years, the general public has unfortunately not been made aware of this fact. Further, an intriguing article in the March 21, 1986 issue of Journal of the American Medical Association concludes, interpretations based on the assumption Jesus did not die on the cross appear to be at odds with modern medical knowledge. Jesus could have never escaped death on the cross following the severe scourging and crucifixion wounds he received. Even if he somehow endured the torture and faked his death on the cross for a time, the spear wound through his heart, as described in John 19:34, would have certified his death. The commanding centurion had personally made sure the job was done correctly. As John 19:32-35 reports, then came the soldiers and brake the legs of the first and of the other which was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was dead already, they broke not his legs. But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith came there out blood and water. And he that saw it bare a record, and its record is true, and he knows what he says is true, that you might believe. The mixture of blood and water which flowed from Jesus' heart is medical evidence he had already died due to a ruptured heart long before the spear was thrust through his side. Additionally, Matthew 27:36 and 54 clearly indicates the Roman soldiers guarded Jesus' cross, so he could not have simply jumped off it, nor could someone have removed his body without prior permission from Pilate. Also, Roman soldiers were experts at killing people through crucifixion and are very familiar with the sight of death. As explained by Day, the Roman soldiers were not unfamiliar with the evidences of death or with the sight of death following upon crucifixion. These soldiers surely would not have taken a still-living Christ off the cross, especially when we consider the punishment for such an offense was death of the soldier. Further, we know from Mark 15:43-45 that Pilate confirmed Jesus' death prior to surrendering his body to Joseph of Arimathea. Additionally, as Bernard Ram noted, certainly Jesus was put to death in a great public execution known to historians such as Tacitus and Josephus. Specifically, these reports may be found in Tacitus' Annals and Josephus' Antiquities. Ram continued, the execution was in the capital of the Jewish Commonwealth under the direction of the Roman governor and his soldiers, in cooperation with the highest Jewish authorities, and during one of the greatest religious seasons. Jesus certainly died. The Swoon Theory is an outright evasion of the record through willful intention without a shred of historical validation. Not only would the expert soldiers have assured his death on the cross, but so would have the large Passover crowd, as some surely heard his death cry described in Luke 23:44-49. Also, Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, or one of the women who had watched the burial proceedings would have noticed signs of life if in fact Jesus was not yet dead. They would have then likely tried to nurse the one they loved back to health. As Chandler explained, the remarkable circumstance of wrapping up the dead body in spices by Joseph and Nicodemus, according to the manner of the Jews in burying, is full proof that Jesus was dead and known to be dead. Had there indeed been any remains of life in him when taken down from the cross, the pungent nature of the myrrh and aloes, their strong smell, their bitterness, their being wrapped around his body in linens with a roller and over his head and face with a napkin, as was the custom of the Jews to bury, must have entirely extinguished them. At the very least, the jostling of Jesus' body in strong scent would have revived him if any life remained at all. Day added, none of those who were occupied with the taking down of the body and its laying in the grave had any suspicion that life remained. Further, even if everyone else had failed to recognize Jesus was still alive, then certainly the Jewish religious leaders, who greatly desired his death and decay, would have made sure he was out of commission. As Day said, the account in St. Matthew's Gospel of the guarding of the sepulchre is clear evidence the Jews, for their part, believed Jesus was dead. Finally, neither 500-plus Jewish eyewitnesses nor strong skeptics like Peter, Paul, Thomas, James, and Jude would have been convinced to endure great persecution and ultimately sacrifice their lives based upon the sight of a half-dead Christ. As Emory University scholar Luke Johnson said, the swoon theory is the purest poppycock, the product of fevered imagination rather than careful analysis. George Hansen remarked, "It is hard to believe this was a favorite explanation of 18th century rationalism." W.J. Sparrow Simpson, speaking in the 1800s, said the swoon theory is now quite obsolete. J.P. Moreland affirmed this remains a lowly regarded theory today, and with good reason.